want to welcome David Hinton again. This is the fourth time David has come on with us in as many years, and it's really been wonderful having him each time. We've gone over different books, and the last time around, you may recall, we did China Root and The Way of Chan, and those were sort of like foundational books upon which his translations of some of the koan classics now stand. So I thought we'd spend a little time on that. But I wanted to welcome David, and I wanted to thank you, David, for coming and joining us and sharing with us not only your beautiful poetry and your prose, but also the process by which you have come to realize that the ancient cultures of China and Japan have something to offer us in this contemporary world. Let me just read something that you and I in email exchanges, I think, really brought sort of a theme perhaps to this night. And it has to do with dismantling. Even you saw the picture that I sent around on the email and joked about how you were the mysterious dismantling poet and translator. But you wrote this in one of your books in China Root. What happens if we dismantle all of our human conceptual constructions, all of our expectations and assumptions that structure consciousness and orient us and define us as centers of identity? To do that, not in the abstract, but at the level of immediate experience. What would that leave us? What might we discover about ourselves at levels deeper than the contingent histories and thoughts that define us as identity centers? And what would it mean about the texture of everyday experience? So welcome, David. And let me see, I think you're going to read something to start. Is that?
Do you want me to read that No-Gate Gateway passage?
Yeah, no, the Blue Cliff Record, the preface to the Blue Cliff Record, if you could.
Oh, the poem, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So this is the poem that's thought to be the kind of preface poem for the whole Blue Cliff Record. Boundless wind and moon are the eye within the eye, limitless heaven and earth, the lamp beyond the lamp. Million homes amid dark willows and lit blossoms, knock at any gate anywhere, and someone will answer.
That's such a lovely introduction to the Blue Cliff Record. Knock on any gate, and people will hear you. People will answer. Very much, within the koan world, we use koans as a metaphor of gates, right? So what I'd like to do, David, is perhaps just for folks who have not been on your call, perhaps, could you tell us a little bit how you got into translation? You've translated, I think I counted 24 books and books of poetry and Confucius and Lao Tzu and Mencius and Zhuangzi. How did you get into translating ancient Chinese?
Well, I started as a poet, and the sort of poetic tradition that I operated in was the kind of West Coast, Ezra Pound, Gary Snyder, Kenneth Rexroth, where ancient Chinese poetry is essentially part of modern American poetry. So at some point I just decided I was going to start doing that. So I started as translating poetry. And then slowly I realized that what I liked about it, and I hadn't quite recognized, one of the things that I liked so much about it, one of the things that makes Chinese poetry so singular is the philosophical world underneath it, what it operates in. So then I started doing philosophy books. And then at some point realized, well, really what this is about is Chan, which is the original Chinese version of Zen, what Zen, it's what it became in Japan. And so then I, moved on from the old Taoist text and started doing Chan text. Because ancient Chinese poets all were essentially Chan practitioners, all the great poets. Chan in ancient China is often portrayed as a kind of religion that's sort of off to the side from mainstream culture, where poetry and art and philosophy are made, but it's not. It's right at the heart of Chinese culture. So all the painters, all the poets, all the calligraphers were really Chan people.
You've written that through translation, I've come to realize that I stumbled upon a way to think outside the limitations, not just of mainstream Western intellectual tradition, but also of my own identity, a way to speak in the voice of ancient China's sage masters and for them to speak in mine. True. Anything to say in that regard?
I don't know what else to say. But I mean, yeah, it's true when I translate something. It's a little different than reading. I have to pretty thoroughly inhabit that mind because Chinese language is so different from English, and so much of it is left out that I basically have to reinvent a new poem in English or a new, say, koan text. And to do that, I have to pretty much inhabit that person's mind. So that's how it feels. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. I thought we could just perhaps, talk about China Root and also the way of Chan. China Root was, you sort of laid out the philosophical framework for how Chan became Chan, right? And in the way of Chan, you sort of gave examples of the many texts that led up to the development of Chan culture. Could you give us a few thoughts on those two books before we go into the substance of it?
Sure. Yeah, as you said, the China Root is just lays out the ideas, the framework, and then because those were just, there are tons of examples and quotes in there, but I wanted in the way of Chan to go back and trace that tradition in the texts themselves to sort of almost as evidence for everything I said in China Root. So I traced the ideas and the sort of assumptions, the whole framework from ancient Taoism, all the way back to the I Ching, through around 400, between 2 and 400 CE, when Buddhism came into China, and then it kind of, and then the Chinese intellectuals sort of took that and transformed Taoism into Chan, and then followed it on through. A little example is people think Bodhidharma is the beginning of Chan or Zen, and that's sort of the legend. But if you look at the text, you can see that Bodhidharma read some earlier texts that are earlier Chan texts. So he wasn't the beginning. He was just one major step along the way, and he's actually a couple hundred years from what we might say is the beginning of Chan.
Yeah, you talk about the dark enigma school, and then the mountains and rivers school, and that how Chan sort of that was the crucible in which Chan was first born, if you will.
Right.
What was the dark enigma school and the mountains and rivers school?
Dark Enigma Learning School was a philosophical movement which focused on cosmology and ontology, reading, and essentially a common, two people wrote commentaries on Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi, in which they drew out the sort of deep philosophical lines, and they were, and then those, and then that was, and then they, that framework was the framework within which the people who invented Chan were operating, the artist intellectuals who were. It's quite a story. I wish I was a scholar enough to write it, but right around 400, there were two kind of Buddhist scholars and two poets, and they all wrote texts and exchanged them. And as a result of this interchange, Chan kind of arose. And the earliest, probably the earliest, but certainly the earliest surviving Chan text comes from one of the poets, where he describes sudden enlightenment and a bunch of other things that are essential Chan ideas. And that's the text that, 150 or 200 years later, Bodhidharma clearly read, because you find all the same ideas in using the same concepts, the same terminology in Bodhidharma's essays. And then the Rivers and Mountain School is the beginning, is the poetry. Chinese poetry is essentially called quote unquote rivers and mountains poetry, which often gets translated just as landscape poetry or landscape painting. And the poet I described as writing the earliest Chan text was one of those poets, Xie Lingyuan. So those two fields, which people tend to think of separate, were blurred together, the poets and the sort of philosophers or Buddhist philosophers, all of which happened on Thatch Hut Mountain in South China, where there were a lot of Buddhist monasteries.
And even further back, going through Zhuangzi to Lao Tzu, you talk about the Paleolithic culture and how the Paleolithic culture died out in so much of the Western world. Somehow the Chinese ideogrammic language was somehow able to preserve that culture.
Yeah, I think the pictographic language is part of it, because it's a more direct language, more direct connection between consciousness and the world around us. But it's a complicated story. The only thing that comes to mind is there was in ancient China, that Paleolithic sort of went underground, and there was a whole religious theocratic system that was monotheistic, not that different from Christianity in its fundamental outlines. But when that fell apart, somehow the Paleolithic is still there underground. And the earliest, very interesting, the earliest Chinese text, the first poetic text, the Book of Songs, and the Tao Te Ching, probably the I Ching, are all sort of collected wisdom tradition texts that probably go back to the Paleolithic, and they were translated out of indigenous languages into classical Chinese. That's pretty kind of stunning. The Chinese written culture, the beginnings of Chinese written culture and Chinese spirituality were quite literally just sort of Paleolithic or indigenous, what's the word? I'm losing this. Pre-text, pre-written text culture, and scholars picked up those what's the word I'm trying to? Oh yeah, oral
Literary,
tradition.
yeah.
Sorry, oral tradition, oral
Okay.
wisdom traditions, and oral poetic traditions. They went and they gathered those, translated them to Chinese, and then they became the beginning of Chinese culture. And so the Paleolithic kind of lives on all the way through Taoism, through Chan, through the poetry.
One thing that you brought up in some of your deep ecology, Wild Mind, Wild Earth, highly recommended, was that that in some ways this Paleolithic sensibility coming through some of this ancient Chinese poetry, including the koan work, from your point of view, is a possible source of salvation. Might be too strong a word, but a possible source of sort of bolstering a deep ecology ethic that can help us get out of our current ecological mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's all about a much more profound belonging to Earth, the natural process. And that's what Taoism and, in the end, Chan are really about, and that is dwelling as integral to natural process. That was sort of the spiritual aspiration. It wasn't like to be immortal. It wasn't to be tranquil. It wasn't to go to heaven and live with God forever. It was dwell and move and let your mind move as integral with natural process. That was what they wanted, and that's what is so lost in the West. The West is all about a very, very detached sort of spirit relationship to the material world. So yeah, that's what Wild Mind is about. I mean, it's very interesting to me that the West, we have come a long ways in the West. Like Thoreau's love of nature. We kind of like, to us, it sounds second nature. It sounds almost not surprising, but you have to remember, before Thoreau or his influences, Wordsworth and the Romantics, that idea was just about unknown to Western culture. The nature, quote unquote, was sort of the devil. It was hostile. It was evil. And it's interesting. It's a long story I talk about in Wild Mind, but the way that transformation in thinking happened was Native American thought and assumptions got carried back to Europe by writers. And so again, it was the Paleolithic that even in the West that gave us the idea that, oh yeah, we really do belong to nature. Nature is good. The way Native Americans lived as integral to nature is spiritually fulfilling. These are all ideas that were completely unknown in Europe before these books reporting on how Native Americans thought and lived started getting published in Europe and became bestsellers. I'm talking about the 18th century.
Right.
A little before, just before Wordsworth and the Romantics.
Rousseau, right.
Yeah. Rousseau got it from them too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And your book, about, it's a little over 10 years old now, but Hunger Mountain, which is just one of the greats. Got it here somewhere. But let me read something from Hunger Mountain. To me, Hunger Mountain was your embodiment of that whole sort of deep ecology ethic in your search for yourself, really. You wrote, "I'm lost here on Hunger Mountain." You were hiking on Hunger Mountain and a storm came in. And wandering through this mountain's topography of forest and stream and rock, its weather and history, I'm wandering through myself in the form of a mountain, that eludes me perfectly. It's got that beautiful sense of the Chinese poets, Li Bo's. The birds have flown away across the horizon. The clouds are drifting. I'm sitting with the mountain, and only the mountain remains. That quality of self and other within nature is not two, right?
Yeah, like that poem is or that Li Bo poem, which I'm trying to find. Maybe I can read it. Is that all right?
Oh yeah.
1 second, I'll get it. Yeah, this is Li Bo. So this is, think about Wordsworth as around 1800. And here's Li Bo in about 750 or something. Reverence Pavilion Mountain sitting alone. The birds have vanished into deep skies. A last cloud drifts away, all idleness. Inexhaustible, this mountain and I gaze at each other, yet alone remaining.
That's great. We
I
we
like
use
the
that poem a lot.
inexhaustible, the inexhaustible, because it comes not at the end, so you almost don't notice it, but it's sort of saying that, the mountain's obviously inexhaustible. That's going to last a long time, almost forever. But once he's become the mountain, he's inexhaustible too.
Well, it's also this dark enigma is inexhaustible, right? Isn't that tapping into uh, basically absence, what you call absence, nothingness, this quality of Buddha nature, we call it, which is inexhaustible.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the Taoist and Chan thing. That natural process just keeps going. Tao just keeps moving. It'll never stop moving. And once you dwell as part of it, it's inexhaustible, and you're inexhaustible.
A couple more points that you made in China Root that I think are really interesting in review. One is that the cosmos as female, and your translation of Lao Tzu is really has a real female feel to it, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it does, because it's there in the original. Lao Tzu uses words like the mother, the dark enigma, female, because the most essential nature of the cosmos, if you forget all your ideas and just look at what you see, if you stand in a field and look at what you see, is change. One thing is growing out of the next, and lives and dies, and the next, and then something else emerges and something else emerges. It's constant birth, 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 birth. And it's like, we don't ever, the West wants everything permanent. That's sort of the story of Western philosophy. But so we don't quite notice it, but it's the most obvious thing in the world that's right in front of us. And it's this fundamental nature of things. Why should it be that way? Why shouldn't everything be static? It's kind of like gravity as this fundamental, you can't ask questions beyond it thing, that the world is just perpetually generative.
Yeah. Perpetually generative, but also perpetually deconstructive, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's constantly birth and life and death. There's this constant cycle. The Tao Te Ching talks about it as return, not death. It's because it's interesting. I don't know. I'm drifting now, but
No, drift. Go ahead.
now Western thinking is kind of horizontal, but Paleolithic and Chinese thinking is vertical. That is, it's about emergence. In the West, it's time. It's like future flows into past, through the present into the past. It's linear time. It's progress going somewhere. But for Paleolithic and China and Chan, it's it's vertical. It's emergence. Things emerge out of absence, or they emerge out of the tissue of existence, and then they exist as independent entities, and then they return to it. So, and that's I don't I haven't written that much about that. But that's a really fundamental structural difference. It's horizontal versus vertical. Emergence versus kind of linear process.
Yeah, yeah, you do talk about this, particularly, I think, in Wild Mind. You know, this emergent quality of the universe, and yeah, it's a beautiful, reflection,
Yeah.
for sure. Another thing that somebody just sent a chat on, and by the way, you know, at the end we're going to have plenty of time for chats and questions. So if you have any, please come forth with them in the last half hour or so. But somebody asked about in your Pochu ebook, that was written quite a while ago. I've got several rather old copies, it seems, and a book I love, particularly the one where he's following the moon, you know, several moons to go to Chang'an, you know,
Yeah,
and it's
that's
just
one of
a
my favorites.
gorgeous, gorgeous poem. But you talk about Chan as Zen as not even being Buddhist.
Mhm.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Your thoughts?
Well, I'm just thinking because I have translated No-Gate Gateway. There are three classic koan collections in ancient China: No-Gate Gateway, the Blue Cliff Record, and then the third one, which people know as the Book of Serenity, but that's not the way it should be translated. So it's a Carefree Ease record. Anyway, I've done that, and that's coming out in a little while. And
Okay.
the introduction to that, when I was writing the introduction to that, it occurred to me, I've never seen the word Chan Buddhism in Chinese. And so I went and I told John earlier that I have the whole Buddhist Taisho, the whole Zen literary tradition in my computer. It's been, somebody digitalized it and you can download it. So I searched a bunch of like classic Chan books. I couldn't find that anywhere. So you can't find in ancient China, at least not in you know, central Chan text. Maybe it exists somewhere, I don't know, the word Chan Buddhism. We always say Zen Buddhism. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Buddhism functions in Chan in a couple of ways. One, people will engage Buddhism because a lot of students, masters will engage Buddhism because a lot of students had been trained in it. And then they're trying to like dismantle that word we were using, these conceptual structures that the students had. It functions as sometimes as a in the Buddhist institution as a way of pretending to have very ancient pedigree. So it was used as a way of, you know, almost like a power thing. But for Chan, that didn't matter. But mostly Chan is about dismantling everything, whether it's Buddhist ideas that came from India or Taoist ideas, or the teacher, whatever the teacher telling you. And that's a main, we were talking about, well, what's sort of unique about the Blue Cliff Record of among the koan collections? That's it. It's that in the Blue Cliff Record, the teacher who put it together, who wrote it, that was his favorite topic, I think. It was, you know, kill the Buddha, kill your teacher. And you see it over and over and over in his gathas, in his commentary poems, that he's making fun of, well, a couple of ways. One, in the koans that he chooses and the way he tells them, you very often can't tell if the master is the one with the wisdom or the student has outsmarted the master. So, so there's no clear hierarchy of wisdom. And then in the poem that's sort of a commentary on the koan, the little koan story, he's always attacking the teacher of the story and ridiculing him, and inviting us then in turn as readers to do the same thing, that is, dismantle the teacher in the story and dismantle Snowgate himself in his poem and strike out on our own. So that's just radical dismantling of everything, only beginning with this Buddhism.
You know, I was in this talk thinking about themes. I was thinking maybe we could call the No Gate Gateway the dismantling, because I agree with you. I think No Gate, or Wumen, time and time again, he's attacking the student and the teacher, particularly in his commentary and his gathas, right? Mm-hmm. And the Blue Cliff Record as being...
You can tell it from his name, because the gate is always, like you said earlier, is the gateway to enlightenment. And he says, no gate, there's no gate.
Yeah, yeah. And in that same way, and the flip side, the Blue Cliff Record as more representing what you would call presence or phenomena, more realization of the way, you know, in the world. So one is emptiness, one is form, one is absence, one is presence. But then I started looking through examples of the Blue Cliff Record, and there was a fair amount of dismantling going on there as well.
Yeah, but I think that's his favorite game to play.
So the you know, in our curriculum, we have somewhere around 110, 120 koans taken from different collections and various sources of poetry and etc. Some created what we call the miscellaneous koans. Mm-hmm. And then in the standard curriculum, and our curriculum, I think, is about 300 years old. It goes back to Hakuin. And we start with the No Gate Gateway. We go to the Blue Cliff Record, and then we go to the Book of Serenity, or Book of Ease, you're translating, or Record of Ease, something like and then we go to the Five Ranks and etc. But it's interesting to talk about both the timing and just the sort of literary quality of, compare perhaps if you can, of the No Gate Gateway and the Blue Cliff Record. I'm just really interested in your thoughts, having, you know, worked with those koans and those commentaries for months and months.
Mm-hmm. What do you like, the timing, like how they relate to each other? Yeah,
well, the No Gate Gateway was about 100 years later, right? It came out, Wumen died in about 1260, and Yuan Wu got the Blue Cliff Record together in about 1135. But just the quality as a translator or as a poet, do you see any differences in their literary style? Not necessarily the koans themselves, but how the collection's put together. The poetry.
These two don't share that many koans. The Blue Cliff Record and the Carefree Ease Record share a lot more. I don't know why. It's maybe useful to go back to something that I often like to talk about in these collections, and that is that they're usually thought to be, which is sort of an assumption in your question, I guess. They're usually thought to be just random collections of little koans, and then teachers are supposed to use them to teach students. But that's not really what these collections are. They're full-blown literary texts, and they're pretty original, because this idea of having a little enigmatic story and then a poem next to it, that's a completely original literary form. And you see the sensibilities of the people who put these together. They were writers, and they chose stories from the tradition, and then they often rewrote those stories for their own purposes a little bit, usually by paring them way, way down. And yeah, so Snowshoot's thing is he's very eloquent. I think his biggest interest is in dismantling and liberating us from teachers and ideas. And then, so that's the first of the three classics, and it's each 100 chapters. Each chapter is a koan story, and then a short poem that's sort of a commentary, but it's really just building on the koan story, because they can be more enigmatic than the koan stories and more challenging as sort of teaching. But these texts, again, are not meant to just be collections of koans to be used by teachers. They are meant to be literary texts, and literary texts are designed, whether they're novels, whether they're poems, to have an immediate impact and transformative impact on a reader. I mean, that's the game they're playing. And so it's the same with these koan collections. So then the Carefree Ease record comes about 100 years after the Blue Cliff record, and it's exactly the same format, but with a different sensibility, and the writers using different koans, shaping them differently, and sort of doing different things with the commentary poems. And then 100 years later comes No Gate Gateway, and that is a little different. It has a story, and then it has a short poem, and then it also has a very short prose commentary, which is also usually pretty enigmatic and mysterious. And he's much more the dark enigma master. He's more interested in. I mean, he's all for dismantling and all the rest, but he's interested in the really deep cosmology, that absence, the source of all things. That's what in Uman is absence, the generative source that is the essential nature that I was talking about earlier of reality, that it's perpetually generative and destructive.
The No Gate. Can I just read what you wrote about him in your No Gate Gateway? The author, No Gate, continually criticizes and ridicules the masters, undermining their teaching, acknowledges their mastery and insight, and he chooses a tale, and then he illustrates that at the deepest possible level. And then right there, he's created the perfect place to dismantle their teaching, thereby redoubling their original Sangha cases, koans, deconstruction of logical thought and explanation. So masters at deconstruction, perhaps.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, David, what is a koan to you? You translated as Sangha case, others translated as public case. What does a koan mean to you? What's the literary value of a koan, I guess?
You mean the term, why it's called Sangha case?
Yeah, and what is a koan within a literary context, perhaps?
Well, it's Sangha case because Sangha was the community. Yeah, I mean, it's a case is a case as in a legal case that was very similar to the way we talk about a legal case, and which has precedent, which operate as precedents, like we're seeing with the Supreme Court. And so they're adapting that. And originally, a Sangha case was now it's a private thing between teacher and student, usually, I believe. But then it was done in the assembly. So that was the public part. So it's like a legal case, a particularly informative instance of whatever. And then it's public because it was done in the Sangha. Later it became private, but that's later. So, I mean, from a literary point of view, it grows right out of the Zhuangzi, which is full of enigmatic little stories like this. And actually, so the Tao Te Ching too, although they're in poetic form, is full of enigma and paradox. And the kind of characters, sort of the Chan characters, these kind of wacky wisdom characters, they're right out of Zhuangzi too. And that's sort of an indication of the connection all the way back to the beginning of Taoism. So and then poetry is the major literary form, really, in China. They weren't writing novels back then, for instance. So these Chan people put together these wacky stories from the Zhuangzi, this whole poetry tradition, and poetry was always very philosophical. With the idea of some kind of magic happens when you put them together. It's like alchemy. You can use the poem to dismantle the koan, the original, the Sangha case itself, or you can use it to push past it and go beyond and push into new ideas. But in both cases, they're very literary in intention, as I said, in the sense that they're meant not to be occasions for teachers to do something with you, but to have that direct, immediate literary impact, transformative impact on you, just as a reader.
Right. Yeah, I remember reading the books, just reading them over and over again. I couldn't understand what they're about, but I somehow just fascinated by the story.
I remember I did the same thing, but I was also very frustrated at, well, why can't they ground this? There's no ground here. There's just this floating vagueness, and maybe sometimes it rose to the level of paradox. And that's, in a sense, what I discovered. What I discovered when I started reading the Chinese and just working through all the poets and the Taoist texts, and it is grounded. The paradox is earthy, and it makes a kind of earthy sense once you've sort of figured out how it works. It's not just back in the 60s and 50s when Zen was becoming popular and was a big cultural thing, part of the counterculture movement. That's what people were kind of loved, was just this floating paradox, because it was kind of vaguely liberating from all the 50s puritanical American ways. But there's somewhere that's what you read if you read Suzuki and Watts now. You can see them. They think they throw a little paradox out. That's all they have to do, is just any little quirky little story, and that's the end of the discussion. Chapters and paragraphs and everything, but there's a lot more to it.
Well, let's read a couple of koans, if that's okay. Maybe you can talk to us about.
That's going to be hard. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know about their whatever you want. Their literary meaning, that when you're translating them, but for me, there's not that many koans that have the word Tao in it. The way, and in the No Gate Gateway, case 19, ordinary mind is the way, the Tao. To me, it's a really interesting bridge between Nanchuan and Matsu, and Jiaozhou, and the more mature Zen school. A bridge between Taoism and Chan, in a way.
Well, I'm not sure. I think this word way or Tao occurs in Zen texts all the time.
This is Do, though. This is Michi. This is road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I capitalize way when it's Tao. Doesn't happen that often. I don't use the word way. It's pretty rare that it's not Tao when I'm translating. Yeah. But we can read. Yeah. So you want me to read this?
Yeah.
This is
just discuss it.
Jiaozhou is a lot of people know it as. But I translate names like that. So this is Visitation Land. It's his enlightenment story. Ordinary mind is way. That's the title of it. Visitation Land. So this is Visitation Land as a student. Visitation Land asks Wellspring South Mountain, what is way? Ordinary mind is way, answered Master Wellspring. Still, it's something I can set out toward, isn't it? To set out is to be distant from. But if I don't set out, how will I arrive at an understanding of way? Way isn't something you can understand, and it isn't something you cannot understand. Understanding is delusion, and not understanding is pure forgetfulness. If you truly comprehend this way that never sets out for somewhere else, if you enter into it absolutely, you realize it's exactly like the vast expanses of this universe, all generative emptiness you can see through into boundless clarity. Now, how can you force that into coherence with the logic of yes, this, no, that? Hearing these words, Land was suddenly awakened. So he later becomes one of the great teachers. So yeah, let's see, what do I want to say about that? One is, I think traditionally in Zen, I mean in modern American or Zen, modern Western Zen, way is like when Wellspring South Mountain answers the question, it says ordinary mind is way. A lot of people would have said is the way, and then that sort of means that's the way you should proceed. That's the way you should practice. But that's not what the word is. The word is Tao, and Tao is like the most fundamental concept in Chinese spirit philosophy or spiritual philosophy. And it essentially means that, well, he describes it toward the end of this, the vast expanses of this universe as generative emptiness, that generative tissue that I was talking about earlier. That's Tao, that fundamental nature of reality, kind of that's so deep it's like gravity. It's just the thing that shapes everything, and you can't ask questions beyond it. So that's what he's talking about. Ordinary mind is way. So how is that true? It's not. If you this is meditation. If you sit quietly and watch what your mind is doing, just watch what's going on in your head. I mean, if the first thing you realize is, the first thing you realize is you're not your mind. You're separate. You can watch it. So you're not that intellectual machine that you usually identify with. But the second thing you notice is that your mind is there's constantly thoughts emerging out of nothing and evolving through their obsessions or whatever, and then vanishing into nothing, and then new thoughts. That is, it's the same generative nature as the cosmos or as Earth. So in a sense, that's the answer. Ordinary mind, just your everyday wandering, unenlightened mind, functions as Tao, as the way. That it is that generative process. And you notice a little later he says, if you truly comprehend this way that never sets out for somewhere else, you enter into it absolutely. And I was saying earlier that the real aspiration of Chan and Taoism is to integrate consciousness with natural process, with Tao. So that's what he says right there. If you realize, if you comprehend way, you see that sorry, where did I if you truly comprehend way, you enter into it absolutely. That's what it's about. It's not about conceptual understanding from outside. It's about becoming part of that process, which is ordinary mind. It's just what goes on in your head all the time. And that's the old Chan thing. You're always already enlightened. You just have to see it. And this is when, supposedly Visitation Land was suddenly awakened, when he suddenly saw, it's just my stupid, obsessive little mind.
There's another thing in the koan in the beginning of Ordinary. He says, still, is it something I can set out toward? Isn't it? To set out is to be distant from it. In other words, you've written in some books that quality of, I don't know, in Japanese it's mui, like no action.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, how you pronounce the character in Chinese, but
it's wu wei, which is no action. It's the same wu.
Yeah.
has no gate.
Mm.
Absence gate, absence action. Yeah.
Yeah, this quality that within his practice, Jiao Zhou, obviously he's a monk, and his whole life a monk, and he's leaning into it. Can I lean into it? Should I lean into it or not? And another translation, non twenty, if you lean into it, then you go against it, which is exactly what you say. Well, if I don't lean into it, how do I know it's the true way? Not and it says the true way is beyond knowing and not knowing, and as you so beautifully write. Way isn't something you can understand, and it isn't something that you cannot understand. Understanding is delusion, and not understanding is pure forgetfulness. Can I ask you to read the Gatha? It's one of my favorite in the
I'm sure.
No Gate Gateway.
We haven't read this in a long time. Okay. Spring flaunts 100 blossoms, autumn a moon, summer brings cool breezes, winter soundless snow. Absence and its operations, all idleness held in mind. Here among humankind, isn't that the perfect season? So a little explanation. Absence is essentially the same as Tao. It's that generative tissue of reality. So absence and its so the first couplet is basically the generative process of the seasons. Spring flaunts blossoms, autumn a moon, summer breezes, winter brings snow. And then it says absence. It could be Tao, it could be generative emptiness, it could be what's dark enigma. Absence and its operations. Its operations are the constant generative process, and they are all idleness because that process is just this natural unfurling of things. It's not what for us is idleness, or instead of sort of our attempt to control things. Anyway, absence and its operations, all idleness held in mind. That's what I was talking about. It's all about this in consciousness. The ordinary mind is way. And here among humankind, isn't that the perfect season? Yeah, because it sort of has all the seasons together at once, because it's the actual source of seasons. There you go. There's a there's a spiel.
Nice, nice. You brought up presence and absence. I want to read to you your fillet, your translation of the Mind Sutra, the Heart Mind Sutra, or the Heart Sutra, known as the Heart Sutra by some people. And I really love this. The beautiful world of things, this world is no different than emptiness, and emptiness no different than this world. This world exactly emptiness, emptiness exactly this world. There is no world of beautiful things, and on. That's I really enjoy that translation of the Heart Sutra. That
That's
form
good.
is emptiness is form. You want to do perhaps read a koan from the Blue Cliff record. Did you want to look at that? Yunmen's rice cakes, is it?
Yeah, gruel cake. Yeah. Okay, I can do that. It's a little interesting. This is just going to be a little bit of reading. But anyway, this is number 77 of the Blue Cliff record, and it's very short. But I'm going to also, afterwards, I'm going to go back and read the original that this was taken from, and you'll see you'll get a sense of how Snowshoe Mountain, the author of Blue Cliff record, was doing literary transformation of the original stories that he's drawing on. They're not just this, they're not just these preset stories that he's copying. So anyway, it's called Cloudgate Gruel Cake. A monk asked Cloudgate Mountain, "What is small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs?" "Gruel cake," replied Cloudgate. So that's the koan, and I'll read the
I love
Gotha.
it.
Excuse me. Small talk that surpasses. No, sorry. Small talk that surpasses. There's no end of Chan pilgrims asking questions. It's a fault line gaping wide open. Can't you see? Look, Cloudgate stuffs it full of gruel cake, and they're still not settled. Even today, all beneath heaven reveres the fairy tales teachers tell. So there you see him dismantling the idea of teachers, the idea of asking questions, of expecting great enlightening answers. It's not till you give those up that you get anywhere. And also the other, I mean, to me, interesting thing about this is that it's really about, and this I think comes up in the thing I'm going to read, the original. That is, the question is the kind of a philosophical question, expecting answers, thinking answers are or what's going to be revelatory for him. And the answer is gruel cake, the most common. It's like the cheapest, breakfast you could get is just a little rice gruel, packed together. So it's thusness. It's just the thing itself. It's not ideas. It's not answers. It's not big ideas. It's just things themselves. And that's where you get to, the Chan beyond answers, beyond text, transmission outside of mind. So you can keep that in your mind a little bit. I'll read the original. This comes from one of the teaching records. Let's see. Okay, here it is. It starts out just the same, but you'll see that the Blue Cliff record just leaves out most of this little Sangha case. So a monk asked, "What is the small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs?" Gruel cake. But now it keeps going. What's the connection? What's the connection? Asked the monk. Exactly. Where's the connection? Exclaimed Cloudgate. Then he continued, "Listen, you haven't understood anything. The moment you hear someone mention the chi weave mind, the moment you hear someone mention the mind of patriarchs, you start asking about small talk that surpasses Buddhas and transcends patriarchs. You're already inner pattern way itself. So why ask how to be a Buddha or a patriarch?" And that jumps back to the ordinary mind thing. You're already way itself. You're already a Buddha or a patriarch because you're already that generative process of things. But anyway, that gives you a sense of how the koans are shaped by for the Blue Cliff record and sort of transformed. It's like a very minimal stripped down version of the original that Snowshoe Mountain can use for his own poem and teaching.
Right. You have that also in the No Gate Gate, where in the first koan, Jiao Zhou's no or wu, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he said yes, and the monk asked, "Well, why then did he jump into that bag of bones?" And Jiao Zhou says, "Because he couldn't help himself, Yeah. I'd love you to read also. Let's do. I don't know if you have anything to say. We have this program called Open Temple, where on a daily basis we sit in the morning, both on the East Coast at 7 a.m., then on the West Coast at 6 a.m. local time, and we've got a koan that we go over and we hold for the week, and each of the sponsors or leaders of the meditation, and anywhere between 30 and 15 people come by they'll often read a poem, almost like a capping phrase, if you're familiar with that in the Japanese Rinzai tradition. But the koan that we're doing this week is case 87, Cloudgate Medicine Disease. Could you read that as well as the Gatha? And if you have any thoughts on that, it'd be lovely to hear.
Oh, good. It's another short one. Less words, the better. Okay, yeah. Cloudgate Medicine Disease. Instructing the assembled Sangha, Cloudgate Mountain said, medicine and disease cure each other. The whole vast expanse of this world, it's all medicine. And what are you yourself? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's the.
And then the Gatha?
Okay. You can see Snowshoe choosing that because, yeah, once again, it's like dismantling teaching. It's you think I have a disease, I need enlightenment, I need medicine. And he says the whole vast expanse of this world, it's all medicine, all the thusness. And what are you yourself? So you can choose, are you just a disease or are you medicine too? So anyway, the Gatha, the whole expanse of this vast world, it's all medicine. Ancients, moderns, how could they be so utterly wrong? Just close your gate and forget about carts and carriages. And that's a reference to like the sort of recluse tradition in Chinese poetry is you close your gate and you don't worry about carriages coming to visit or going down the road outside of your gate making noise. You're so lost in your sort of silence. Anyway, just close your gate and forget about carts and carriages. Life's Buddha road ahead is your own boundless silence. Wrong, utterly wrong, that ox-herd rope leading the nose of your original face. Oh, I see, wait a minute, sorry. So this is, okay, wrong, utterly wrong, everything that came before, and now he's giving you the answer. That ox-herd rope leading the nose of your original face. It's distant skies. So the kind of like, the ox-herd tales, and there's the idea that the ox-herd is the thing you need to tame to be enlightened, and you have a rope leading the ox-herd and training it. And so the ox-herd rope leading the nose of your original face. It's just sky. It's just distant skies. It's nothing. It's distances. It's beauty. So that's how I would read it. What have you done with that in the?
Yeah, it's a beautiful koan. It, in Yunmen style or Cloudgate style, it's a multiple part, right? So sickness and medicine heal or correspond, and the whole world is medicine. He could have said the whole world is sickness, right? But there was a very positive leaning into it, I thought. And then who am I? What am I? And
I don't know if he could have said the whole world is sickness. Do you think he could?
Mm-hmm. he could have said the whole world is David Hinton, right?
Well, yeah, he could have, but then this thing doesn't work. Medicine and disease cure each other, but if you say the whole world is disease, then it kind of falls apart.
Well, this also comes from a story credit to the Buddha, right? He goes and asks one of his followers to, take a blade of grass and see if you can find anywhere that is not medicine. And he comes back and he says the whole world essentially is medicine. So it's just a beautiful koan, and I think it's one of our favorites. But let me ask a few chat questions. David, okay. Do you have peers in China that are bringing forth new editions of the collection in modern Chinese? And if so, are such collections at all popular in China?
Oh, don't know. I'm not connected with people in China. Um, so yeah, I don't know anything about that.
One thing I noticed, David, is that you use the Wade Giles um,
Yeah.
English system rather than the Chinese, the official Chinese system. Help me
Pinyin.
out here. Uh,
Pinyin.
Pinyin, yeah, which was created by Mao Zedong. Um, why do you do that?
Because when I started translating, Wade Giles was the standard, and all of the literary translation and all the scholarship, actually, this is '89, was Wade Giles. And then I translated for probably 20 years before people started changing over to Pinyin. So for me, I had already done all this stuff, and I wasn't going to suddenly change everyone's name. And because often you can't, Pinyin and Wade Giles in some places are so different, you would never recognize them as the same word. And also, I wanted to keep the coherence of the whole literary tradition of Chinese and English, all of which was Wade Giles.
Mhm.
So it's just like I'm not sure, back in those in '89, in the '90s, '80s, '90s, and then I don't know how much beyond that into the aughts. Um, Everyone said no, we're going to keep doing Wade Giles. Libraries were using Wade Giles, and then suddenly, and I'm not in touch with academia. Suddenly, maybe having to do with politics, everybody started changing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just a awkward situation. I have no good options really. I can't switch over but then a lot of people are used to pinyin now. So,
Yeah. Do you read Pinyin Chinese?
yeah, it's pretty simple to see the differences between them. I mean, you can learn the differences in 15 minutes or half an hour. It's systematic, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can just jump back and forth easily.
Has vertical time, emergence, and return changed the way you experienced your own life?
Um, yeah, I don't have an, I don't, yeah, I'm sure it has. I can't remember what it changed from, so I don't know. I can't remember. Um, I mean, in a way, it's very difficult to live in that vertical time because we all have watches and appointments. Like 9 o'clock is Pacific Zen Center for me tonight. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm not very good with schedules. I barely keep. Only this year I started barely having like a schedule book, and I tend to just kind of drift through the day and the week. So maybe I do live in that time. And sometimes it doesn't work. Once you keep colliding with the linear world.
I love the way you describe your work sometimes, how you're spending all day with the masters, the
Mhm.
great Chinese masters, and how that in many ways is a practice, some meditation practice for you. Would you expect? Would you expand on the Chan concept of lineal time, the perpetual moment?
Lineal or linear?
I guess linear time, probably.
Linear time. Oh,
It says lineal, but linear, I think, is probably
yeah. I
close
wonder if
enough.
they mean lineal as in that's what was handed down. That other because the perpetual moment is not linear time. It's the opposite of linear time. It's that vertical emergence that I
Mm.
was talking about. Um, Now, what's the question? What I just expand on?
Yeah. So, would you expand on Chan concept of time and perpetual moment? I guess the lineal time and perpetual moment.
Well, no, let's see. Well, I mean, to go back to ordinary mind, and I talked a little bit about meditating. You can sit and you can watch thoughts emerging. It's easier than out in the world. You don't that often see things really emerging. I mean, we can watch clouds sort of appear and disappear, and and once in a while we see like a baby appear and people die. But in your mind, you can really see that emergent moment. And once you're meditating, and once you're inside of that place where it's all just emergent, um, there is no linear time there, right? So you can just inhabit it that quickly, just sitting quietly. And if you look out around in the world, you can't find time. That this metaphysical idea of time that we all assume is a kind of metaphysical river that flows past us somehow or through us. Everyone assumes it's true. That you can't find that anywhere. All there is change, and time is just us measuring change. How many times does your watch tick? You make your watch tick regularly, and 60 of those is a minute, but it's all just change. Each tick is change. But I don't know, is that an answer? As the perpetual moment, yeah. I mean, it is a perpetual moment. We just are kind of blinded to it because in the West we have these grand metaphysical assumptions, time and space, that don't actually exist. There's no abstract geometrical space within which things happen, and that's less important than time, in which there's just not this flow of future through the present into the past.
Okay. Further questions? Go ahead, Chris.
Whenever I hear just the mind, and I think the character is heart mind, and I know you really lean into the consciousness part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about the encounter where he says understanding and not understanding, either one is not what we're talking about here. It's something about comprehension. And so I take that to be bodily comprehension. That is it seems like that's very important in Chan, that this red lump of flesh is not how out of this vertical time. In fact, it's not escaping that at all. So
Mm-hmm.
I just wonder about the deep connection of what I would call body, not necessarily my body. I think body makes the me, right? It's just part of the me, is just part of what's going on, and how that is connected to this nothing's own doing. But I don't know. It's interesting, right? The body as limitation or not limitation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As the body as part of that natural process. And I think part of what is going on, and the old Chan people want you to see, is that mind is no different from body. That is, it too is just that generative process going on. It's part of, just like, we know the body is, right? Because we know the body is born and lives its life and then dies. But it's harder.
Well, I may know that, but I'm not sure that the body exactly. I'm not that sure that the body's experience of the body is what you just described.
But we don't usually experience the mind that way. And that's sort of the trick of integrating into natural processes, seeing that the mind moves the same way. It's generative too, things appearing, disappearing.
Yes.
So it's part of it. So the mind and body aren't separate. They're both functioning in that same part of that same kind of tissue. I'm not sure if that's quite what you're getting at, but
well, yeah, this to me, this deepness of not knowing really, but yet as you said, fully entering, which feels in meditation like I don't know what these gates are if I don't label them, but it's very present. That seems to be experience. right? So my identity shifts, but it's interesting because it's grounded in having a body.
Yeah.
If I didn't have a body, I wouldn't have this strange experience on the edge of my body,
Yeah. Right.
So I think that's
Totally your body. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Any other questions? Yes, Barry, please unmute.
Yeah, hi, David. I've loved reading your books. I'm having a problem with not woo-wee, excuse me, Tzujan, Tzujan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you translate that, occurrence appearing of itself. And where I run into a problem with that is nothing has a self. And so to me, it seems like kind of and I know it is very important to most of the Chan masters. Really use that a lot and think of that a lot.
Well,
So
self is different. Self is different than itself. Like I could say this lamp itself. That's just like it doesn't imply like a spirit self. And the point of that, the reason I say that I do that is because the whole idea of Zeron is that emergence that I was talking about. Each thing emerging of its own accord. It's not created from outside. It's not generated from outside. It's all emergence. Each thing of itself, not so it's occurrence appearing not as a self, but just of itself. That phrase, that's just an idiom, meaning it's doing it. Something else isn't doing it for it or to it or driving it.
could you say as is? Appearing as is? Would that
Yeah, but that doesn't really get at the sense that it's self-generating, and that's important. I mean, the Chinese word, the first of those two words, zi, is literally of itself. But it can apply to anything. It doesn't imply like a spirit self. It doesn't have anything to do with that. But I mean, you could say like a mountain. I don't know what. The mountain shines of itself or something. And so, I mean, literally it means self as is. You were using that word as is, right? That's the Ron part of that. It's a two character word. So of itself as it is or something like that. Yeah. But that's a good question. Yeah.
well, I had a problem because I run into self. And
Yeah.
and so it is such an important concept in the Chan masters use it constantly.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm delighted to be able to ask you the question. I almost sent you an email and said, please explain it. I didn't think you'd answer my email, but anyway,
You're right. That's a concept that Chan people use all the time, and it starts way back in the Tao Te Ching.
yes,
And that's like
yeah.
that's how the line, the thread is. That's one of many ways that you can see that thread goes straight from the Tao Te Ching all the way through Chan.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ellen Fox.
So our whole tradition in PCI is built on inquiry. And if there's no point in asking questions, let's go with that.
You have to talk to John about that.
I don't know what you're talking about, Ellen, but thank you
So
for the
seriously,
comment.
I mean, our whole practice, especially from Joan and John, is built on inquiry. So I'm trying to put that together with, what all these guys are saying. Doesn't matter. Don't ask the question.
I think the truth of the matter is, yeah, you need to inquire, but the point of inquiry is to get to the point where you realize that the inquiry is just getting in your way.
There's
But
no
that's,
point.
that's a kind of, yeah, I don't think you can pretend that that's easy. I don't think these Chan masters really expect someone to, from the very beginning, not ask a question. But they're trying to tease people into understanding far enough that they realize that to ask a question is to be distant from, as that koan said that we just
Uh-huh. Okay, yeah,
um
yeah.
and like if once you realize ordinary mind is way, what's there to ask a question about?
I'll have to question
You have to
that.
tell John to change his methodology, I guess. His teaching strategy.
Thank you, Alan. So with that, why don't we wrap it up? David, could you read a poem? Do you have the Way of Chan handy?
Yep, right here. You have a poem?
Could you look at page 106? Following axe bamboo stream, I cross over a ridge and hike on along the river.
Yeah, this is kind of a long one. But it's interesting you choose this. Remember, I was talking about the origin of Chan in the first Chan text, the earliest, which was a couple hundred years before Bodhidharma. Well, this poet I'm going to read was the person who wrote that Chan text, and that Chan text, most of it is also in the Tao. That original Chan text, most of it is translated in the Way of Chan. But I also translated some of it. Well, I did a whole book of his poems 20 years ago. But anyway, I include some of his poems in the Way of Chan too. So, okay. Following axe bamboo stream, I cross over a ridge and hike on along the river. Though the cry of gibbons means sunrise, its radiance hasn't touched this valley, all origin dark quiet. Clouds gather below cliffs, and there's still dew glistening on blossoms when I set out along a wandering stream, climbing into narrow canyons far and high. Ignoring my robe to wade through creeks, I scale cliff ladders and cross distant ridges to a river beyond. It snakes and twists, but I follow it, happy just meandering along, past pepperwort and duckweed drifting deep, rushes and wild rice in crystalline shallows. Reaching tiptoe to ladle sips from waterfalls and picking still unfurled leaves in forests, I can almost see that lovely mountain spirit in a robe of fig leaves and sash of wisteria. Gathering orchids brings no dear friends, and picking hemp flower no open warmth. But the heart finds its beauty in adoration, and you can't talk out such shadowy things. In the eye's depths, your past worries you, awakened into things all wandering away. Thanks for
Ordinary
choosing.
mind is way.
Yeah.
David Hinton, one of the great translators of ancient Chinese in our time. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks
I
for
really
having me.
appreciate
Thanks
your
for the great question.
presence. Yeah.